What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and you're watching our college football channel. We're going to give you a very early projected record for the Auburn Tigers and preview their 2024 schedule. Before we get to that, let's look back at 2023. Here was the schedule for Auburn last season, and it's always a tough schedule. They've always had a tough schedule because they've always had to play Georgia out of the East, and then, of course, you got to go through the SEC West. And they usually play a really good team in the non-conference. Cal wasn't too bad for them last year. In the past they've played Oregon and Clemson and teams like that, but they got through the schedule, were able to get to a bowl game, and really other than New Mexico State, they beat the teams that you'd expect them to beat, and they lost to the teams you'd expect them to lose to. And so let's get to the schedule this year, and let's break it down. First, let's look at the non-conference schedule. They'll play Alabama, A&M, California, and New Mexico. Not New Mexico State, but New Mexico and Louisiana Monroe. So a pretty favorable schedule there in the non-conference. Cal playing in Jordan-Hare, you'd expect Auburn to be able to take care of business in that game. So if you win all these, you're already at 4 wins and looking pretty good. You look at the home schedule, those 4 non-conference games. Arkansas, who is a team that they beat pretty easily last year. Oklahoma, they welcome them into the SEC. You got Vanderbilt and Texas A&M. So if they win their non-conference games and beat Arkansas and Vanderbilt, who they should be favored against, teams that they beat pretty easily last year, you're already at a bowl game. But let's take a look at the road schedule. Georgia, Missouri, Kentucky, and Alabama. So that's a pretty tough road schedule. We're talking about Georgia, Missouri, Alabama, potentially 3 top 10 teams. And then Kentucky, that's going to be a tough one as well. Maybe not a top 10 team, but they're always solid, and going on the road and beating them is going to be very tough for Auburn. So let's go week by week. They'll start with Alabama A&M on August the 31st. That'll be a nice way to start off the season. Should be an easy win. And then they'll get Cal in week 2 on September the 7th. And you wonder if this game, it would just kind of be funny because Auburn had to play late last year. They had to play on, at 10:30 Eastern time. It'd be funny if they wind up playing this game at noon Eastern time. Since Auburn had to stay up late, maybe they make Cal play really early. I don't know. We'll see what time that game winds up being scheduled at. But New Mexico is next on September the 14th, and then it's Arkansas on the 21st and Oklahoma on the 28th. So they do not travel away from home. All of their games in the first 5 games of the season, all at home. And this is a weird schedule because you've got 5 straight home games, and then they have 3 straight road games. That is just very strange. They got Georgia on October the 5th, and that game will be on the road. Then they get a bye week, so it's not 3 weeks in a row, but it's 3 games in a row. They'll play at Missouri on the 19th, and then at Kentucky on the 26th. And then they will kick off the month of November at home against Vanderbilt. And then they get a bye week, not an ideal spot for a bye week between Vanderbilt and ULM. But maybe that gives them time to prepare for Texas A&M and Alabama. I don't know how they'll use that bye week, but they get the bye week, then ULM, then at home against Texas A&M. So after 3 straight road games, 3 straight home games, and then they close things out with another road game, this time at Alabama in the Iron Bowl. So this is a schedule that is not horrible, but it's pretty tough. Again, the road schedule is going to be very tough. Going to be one of the toughest road schedules in the SEC. The home schedule, though, is pretty favorable. They might have, I haven't done these rankings yet. They might wind up with the easiest home schedule in the SEC and the toughest road schedule. I don't know. It seemed like there was another team that had a really tough road schedule that was probably a little bit tougher than this one. But that's interesting there. The games on the road are going to be tough. The games at home, they're going to have a great shot in. And again, 3 road games in a row with Georgia, Missouri, and Kentucky. At least they get the bye week between Georgia and Missouri. If you can start 5-0, though, they have a chance to finish the season pretty strong when you've got Vanderbilt, ULM, and Texas A&M at home there in November. So an interesting schedule for Auburn. It's, there's some good and bad here, but overall, any schedule in the SEC is going to be tough. Here were some of the projections from last year, and you see a 6-6 record for Auburn. Their projection was 7-5. I predicted them to go 6-6. Athlon predicted them to go 6-6, and their over/under was at 6.5. So yeah, we got it right at 6-6. But if they just show up and beat New Mexico State, this team would have gone 7-5, and the projection actually would have been correct. And just imagine if you took the over on the over/under with Auburn and you lost that bet because they lost to New Mexico State. I'm sure that was frustrating for some people. But again, here's the schedule for 2024, and this is the scale that we use. If it's under 20, over 80, those games are counted as wins or losses. 20 to 29, 70 to 71 to 80%, those games are counted, not counted as wins, but they are games where, you know, they should be favored or underdogs by double digits. And then you have your 30 to 39, 61 to 70. Those are games where I think the spread's going to be closer to a touchdown, 6, 7, 8 points. And then the 50-50 games, they'll stay in the white. Those are games that could really go either way. And games where, again, I think the spread will be 3 or 4 points, kind of in that range. So let's get to it. We'll start with the easy wins. You got Alabama A&M, New Mexico, and Louisiana Monroe. These should all be easy wins for the Tigers. You know, I know some people say, well, yeah, New Mexico State last year. Yeah, it can happen. But if we're just looking at the odds of how things normally play out, they should take care of business in all 3 of these games. You know, they're not 100%. Nothing's 100%. But again, with the formula that we use, these will be counted as wins. And then I think you got Vanderbilt. That's a game where Auburn should be a double-digit favorite. They get them at home. They are, you know, better team than Vanderbilt. Plus, playing that game at home, I think that's one where they'll probably be favored by a couple of touchdowns. All right, now let's go to games where I think they'll be favored by about a touchdown, 6, 7 points. So we're talking about Cal and Arkansas. I believe Auburn will be better than both of these teams, maybe not by a lot, but home field advantage does make the difference, and that's why these games wind up in the purple and not as 50-50 games, because again, I don't think there's a huge gap between these two teams, although Auburn did beat Arkansas by a lot last year in Fayetteville. But it's a new season, and again, individual games from last year don't really matter. We just put all these teams into tiers. And so, yes, Auburn should be favored, I think, by about a touchdown in both of those games, which means if they take care of business in their first 4 games, they'll be 4-0 heading into a big game with Oklahoma. And speaking of Oklahoma, both the Sooners and then the Wildcats of Kentucky, they're in the yellow. So I think Auburn will be about a touchdown underdog in both of these games. Oklahoma in a tier above Auburn. And then Kentucky, about the same as Auburn, I think. But with that game being on the road, it's just close enough that I do have that game in the yellow. I think Kentucky will be favored by probably 6 points in that game. So games that Auburn can win, but I do think they will be underdogs in both of those matchups. And then sticking with the underdog theme, Missouri and Alabama both on the road. I think Auburn's probably going to be double-digit underdogs in these 2 games. Missouri and Alabama look to be top 10 teams this year. Auburn, looking at right now, probably not a top 25 team. And the fact that they're playing those games on the road, that's why they are in the orange and not the yellow, because, again, I do think that Auburn will be double-digit underdogs in both of those games. You never know about the Iron Bowl, of course, and we don't really know how good Alabama is going to be, but I think it's safe to say, again, that Auburn will definitely be underdogs in both of those games, and, again, I think it'll probably be double digits. And then I think Georgia, that's one where I just don't see Auburn winning. I mean, they've got a chance, of course, but playing in Athens against Georgia, who might be the best team in the country, I know Auburn played them tough last year, but it's a different story going into Athens versus Jordan-Hare. I think Georgia can pretty much count that as a win. Again, I know it's a rivalry, but if it was at Auburn, I would not feel this way. But being in Athens, I do think Georgia should be able to take care of business in that game. That leaves Texas A&M. That's really their only 50-50 game. So for Auburn, it's like every game you feel like you know who the favorite's going to be, except maybe this Texas A&M game, and that's one that could really go either way. But I talk about how these are projections and not predictions. This is a good example of it. I actually think Auburn might have a better chance to beat Oklahoma than beat Texas A&M, even though with the formula that we use, Oklahoma is in the yellow, Texas A&M is in the white, because again, it's based off of where teams finished last year. And yes, we do look into the future a little bit with this formula, but it's not a prediction. It's just a formula, and that is a perfect example. Again, I think Auburn has a real good shot to beat Oklahoma at home. Texas A&M might be a tougher game. Kentucky might actually be an easier win than Texas A&M. You never know. But again, my predictions won't necessarily line up with these projections. And so what we get when we do the formula is we get 7-5. So same projection as last year for Auburn. If you just go with the favorites in all these games, that would have them losing to Oklahoma, Georgia, Missouri, Kentucky, and Alabama. So that's 5 losses. And really the Texas A&M game is the difference in 6-6 or 7-5. But again, you might win one of those and you might lose to, let's say, Cal or Arkansas. I mean, that's just the way college football goes. But I think a pretty fair projection for Auburn is 7-5, and that's what the formula does put out there. So 7-5 for Auburn. Do you think better or worse? What are your thoughts, your projections on this team? Let me know down in the comments below.